Another prime area we will talk about now is the communication and language area. Communication and language, they are not quite the same thing. So I would like to distinguish a little bit for your better understanding what we talk about. So communication is a type of inbuilt mechanism in human beings. So children tend to communicate and look for communication and reach for the environment right from the birth. And the ways they communicate, of course, at the stage of birth, they are not the same as the ways to communicate when they are 5 years old. So we can talk about many different, actually, ways of communication. So you will see a list of types of communication here in this slide. So we can talk about verbal communication, which relates to the spoken language, to actual talking, speaking. We can talk about non-verbal communication, so involving body language, gestures, facial expressions. So other than verbal ways to express your thoughts and ideas. We can talk about also creative and expressive activities as a type of communication. As an example, I could give, like, let's assume a child draws something on the paper, and then he will show it to you. And the drawing itself, it has a meaning. The child wants to communicate something with that. So this is another way that children will try to get their message across. Another type of communication is written. So any written text, basically, or when the children learn to write, yeah, that's how they communicate themselves. And of course, we live in the ICT age, so that is another type of communication among people. But when we talk about early childhood, of course, the most essential types of communication is nonverbal for the very young ones before they even learn the skill of speaking, and verbal when they learn to speak. And the third, the creative and expressive activities. So those are the most typical types of communication for the early childhood stage. So what is language then? Language actually is not about speaking as such. Language is a complex system of signaling. We humans, we actually use the system of signalings through all the 5 senses we possess. So language is one of the dimensions, one of the complex systems of signaling. So we will talk now about 3 main language skills, which are listening and attention, understanding and auditory processing, and speaking. We also keep in mind that language is as a set of skills. I like to emphasize that it's a set of skills, it's not just a single skill. Language as a set of skills develop rapidly in the first years of life. And actually, it has far-reaching effects. It is a critical part of a child's overall development. I would like you to think of language as not only a tool for communication. I think this is the most traditional way to think of language, that we need language for communication. Of course, it is so. We need language for communication because we have to engage in the relationships, we have to communicate our messages, we have to express ourselves, we have to understand and be understood. But also, we could think of language as a tool for thinking, something that happens as a mental process. So language for thinking actually supports the important skills we learn with time. Skill of thinking, skill of problem solving, literacy skills. So this is also important to keep in mind that language has at least these two distinct functions. If you go into the aspects, in the more detailed aspects now, and talk about the first one, listening and attention, why do we emphasize the importance of listening skills and attention skills? It is because about 80% of learning in early years as well is verbal. So it happens through the spoken language. And of course, when we communicate our messages to children, we want them to be concentrated, we want them to listen, we want to draw their attention to what we are saying. But actually, if you think about a simple example, you are asking your child to, let's say, bring a coat and shoes and put them on. You are communicating more than just one message of actual instruction. You communicate a few messages at the same time. You want your child to look at you, you want the child to hear your voice, you want your child to maybe read your body language if you use gestures or other expressions. You want your child to also filter out all the background noise, which is going at the same time. You want your child to concentrate on only on what you are saying. And also you want the child to keep all this information in mind and remember it. So that is actually a very complex process. It's not only about technical listening as such. So it's good to be aware of this complexity. And it's good to understand that at different ages, you have different expectations for the child regarding his listening and attention skills. The younger the child, of course, the less attention span he will have, and the more sensitive he will be to distracting factors around. But the older the child, the more complex instructions he will retain in his mind, and he will follow and he will act accordingly. So it's also a process. It's also something to be looked at. To be looked at a skill that is under development all the time. And as I mentioned, we could talk here about different stages of attention. So at very young children, at the age of 0 to 1, they have a very short attention span, and they can listen only to very short sentences and phrases or instructions. And of course, when the child grows older, you will get into variations. You will have a single channel attention, or you will have a single channel attention with more flexibility. That would basically mean that the child, let's say you say the name of a child who is playing at the same time. So he still is continuing his play, but he will also react on his name. So this is what would be called as a single channel attention with more flexibility. That's typical for the children already at the age of 2 and 3 years old. And then, of course, when the child grows older, you will have attention under voluntary control. So the child will already get more focused, but also more selective to what he is listening or responding to. And when the children grow, we can talk about two-channeled attention. So it means that basically children may combine two activities at the same time. They can, for example, listen and act accordingly. So it will be two-channeled attention in place. And then about like fully integrated attention, we can talk about age of 5 and 6. Again, in practice, what it means that the younger the child, the less expectation we should have, though we still provide the stimuli. And the older the child, the more, the longer instruction he is capable to understand, retain, and follow. We continue talking about the prime area called communication and language, and we can talk about another aspect now, which is understanding and auditory processing, and how it differs actually from other aspects. So understanding and following directions are the functions that are very important for communication. But what it means in practice? In practice, it means that understanding and auditory processing will develop before the actual speaking function, before the actual speaking skill. So even if the child at the age of 2, having very few words or sounds, depending on the child's developmental stage, it does not mean that he does not understand. The child understands basically right from day one, we can say so. The child understands much more than actually the child can express. So we should, again, not underestimate the child's ability, and think it that way, that even if the child is not yet ready to express themselves, or even if the child is not necessarily quite following your directions, the child still surely understands. So again, this is to emphasize that importance of stimulation is always here, and language is a complex system. Provide and create variety of different activities and experiences for children to promote the skills. Talk to the child, even if the child doesn't say anything back. Yeah, sing to the child, rhyme to the child, read to the child. Any activity which involves language, even if it seems like a one-way activity, so adult to child, this is absolutely fine. It just has to do with the physiology, with the development of the child. Next, we could talk about speaking. So the third aspect of language communication prime area. Speaking or speech, this is actually a very technical stage. So this is just an act of actual talking, producing sounds. So that's why I encouraged you not to mix language and actually speech together, because they are not the same thing. So speaking skill involve coordinating of a group of actions, a group of muscles, also called speech apparatus. So that is in order to produce the sound. Of course, by speaking to a child and with a child, children develop their speaking skill. Children learn new words. They have to hear. Yeah, they have to hear the words. They have to hear the structures in order to internalize the language as such. So again, it's very important to speak to a child from the very first day he is born. in terms of practice, it's good to warn you or like to make you feel alert to aspects related to the speech delay. Actually, we can talk about quite minor things like maybe ear infection or adults' language being too complicated or too extensive. So these factors can impact on speech skill development. So if the child has a speech delay, check that these things are in place, and then assess the child accordingly, and continue helping your child with developing the speaking skill. So the idea here is to say that sometimes it can be just a technical problem why the child speaking skill is being delayed.